Get off my land, boy! Maggie's voice cracked like a whip across the vineyard rows, slicing through the heavy California heat. The year was 1871, and the Holloway estate, once full of life, now stood in silence. Its mistress guarding it like a wounded lioness. Elias Carter froze by the fence, dust clinging to his boots, thirst burning his throat. All he had asked for was water. Instead, he was met with fire, her eyes, sharp, glassy, and tired, pinned him as if he were a thief. The townsfolk had whispered about her long enough. Widow Holloway, cold as stone, too proud for companionship, too scarred for love. Now a young cowboy stood at her gate, and in her grief-hardened heart, his presence could mean nothing but trouble. She lifted the pail in her hand, and for a fleeting second, Elias thought she might show mercy, but her grief betrayed her. With a sharp tilt, she poured the water into the dirt at his boots. The soil drank deep, but his throat stayed dry. The dust hissed, and so did the shame in his chest. Elias clenched his jaw, fighting the sting of rejection. "Ma'am, I ain't here to steal nothin'. Just thirsty." His words were quiet but cut with pride. He should have walked away. Any man with sense would have. But something in her eyes stopped him. Beneath the fire, he saw it. A flicker of loneliness, a mirror of his own. And in that moment, neither of them knew it, but a dangerous story had begun. A story of forbidden love, of whispers and judgment, of two broken hearts daring to beat as one. If you love Wild West stories of love and betrayal, subscribe so you don't miss the next tale. The next morning, Elias rode into the dusty heart of San Luis Obispo, his canteen still empty, his pride still stung. He told himself he wouldn't think of her again, the widow with fire in her voice and sorrow in her eyes. But fate has a cruel way of testing a man. Inside the general store, the air smelled of tobacco and fresh flour. Elias was bent over a barrel of oats when he heard the rustle of skirts. He looked up, and there she was, Margaret Holloway. Her posture was proud, but her face told a quieter story. Sleepless nights, burdens heavy as lead. She clutched a list, ignoring the stares that followed her. The room shifted. Whispers crawled like snakes through the shelves. That boy again. A drifter sniffing after the widow's land. Elias felt the heat of their words burn his skin, but it was Maggie whose cheeks flushed. She grabbed a sack of flour, her hands trembling just enough for him to notice. Their eyes met across the store. For a heartbeat, the world stilled. His gaze steady, hers uncertain, almost pleading. He tipped his hat, a quiet sign of respect, but she turned too quickly, as though scorched by the thought of being seen with him. Her skirts brushed past, and the bell above the door chimed her escape. Elias stood frozen, oats slipping from his fingers. He should have hated her for the insult she dealt him, but instead, something deeper rooted in his chest. Not anger, but curiosity, even longing. He knew then that the widow Holloway was not made of stone, no matter how hard she tried to be. And he, fool that he was, had already begun to crave the truth of her heart. The road outside town stretched hot and lonely, dust rising in lazy clouds beneath wagon wheels. Maggie Holloway's mare strained against the load, her wagon heavy with flour, seed, and a stubborn wheel that had groaned since she left the store. She urged the horse forward, but then it came, the sharp snap of wood. The wagon tilted, spilling half its burden into the dirt. Maggie cursed under her breath, clutching her skirts to keep from stumbling. From behind, hoofbeats thundered. She turned, heart clenching, and there he was again, Elias Carter, astride a lean chestnut, reins loose in his hand. He slowed, taking in the scene. For a long moment, Maggie braced for mockery, but instead his voice came soft. "Looks like you could use a hand." Her chin lifted, pride a shield against his kindness. "I don't need help from a boy who doesn't know when to keep his distance." But Elias dismounted anyway, his boots striking the earth with purpose. He didn't argue, didn't press, just knelt by the broken wheel, running his fingers along the splintered wood. His silence unsettled her more than words could. With quick, practiced hands, he braced the axle, lifted the wheel, and tightened the iron rim with the tools slung at his saddle. Maggie tried to protest, but her voice faltered when she saw the sweat streak his brow, the quiet focus in his eyes. When the wagon stood steady again, Elias rose, dusting off his palms. He looked at her just once, not with triumph but with something gentler, a respect she hadn't felt in years. "You're set now," he said simply. Maggie swallowed, torn between gratitude and fear of what kindness might open. "Thank you," she whispered, the words foreign on her tongue. Elias tipped his hat and mounted his horse, leaving her with a wagon steadied and a heart unsettled. Summer's sun bore down on the Holloway vineyard, bleaching the leaves and baking the soil until the vines sagged in defeat. Maggie stood at the rows, sweat clinging to her brow, her hands raw from tying broken trellises. She had once managed the place with hired men, but as the harvest soured and the profits thinned, one by one they drifted away. By July, only silence remained. Silence and Maggie's stubborn will. She carried a basket of tools when a voice came from behind the grapevines. "You'll wear yourself to the bone that way." Elias stepped out, shirt rolled at the sleeves, dust on his collar. He looked at her vineyard as though it belonged to him, eyes sharp with the knowledge of labor. "I don't recall hiring help," Maggie said, bristling though her hands trembled from exhaustion. Elias leaned on a fence post. "Didn't come for pay. Came 'cause I know what it is to fight work bigger than yourself. Let me help. Food's payment enough." Her lips pressed thin. Pride screamed to send him away, yet the rows behind her told the truth. She couldn't keep the vineyard alive alone. The vines didn't care for gossip or shame. They needed hands, strong and steady. For a long breath she stared at him, testing his resolve. He didn't flinch. Finally she set the basket down. "Fine. But you work my way, and you keep your head low. I won't have tongues wagging in town about some boy living off a widow." Elias nodded, his grin quick and boyish, but his eyes held something deeper. A promise she didn't dare name. That evening, as the sun sank behind the hills, two silhouettes moved among the rows. One woman too proud to ask for help, and one cowboy too stubborn to walk away. The vineyard slept under a sky full of restless stars, but the Holloway barn still breathed with the creak of timber and the scrape of tools. Elias balanced on the rafters, hammering down loose shingles, his silhouette lit by the soft glow of a lantern below. Maggie waited near the ladder, arms folded tight, as if holding herself together against something unseen. "You work like you're chasing the sun," she said, her voice breaking the hush of crickets. Elias chuckled, driving the last nail. "Maybe I am. Sun don't wait for a man, nor for a vineyard either." He climbed down, boots hitting the packed earth. Sweat shone across his brow, his shirt clinging to his chest. Maggie told herself not to look, but her eyes betrayed her. She handed him a plate of cornbread and beans. "Eat. You'll fall off that roof if you don't." Their fingers brushed as the plate passed between them. The touch was nothing more than an accident, yet it sent a charge through her like lightning striking dry earth. She pulled her hand back too quickly, the plate rattling in his grip. Elias's eyes lingered on her, steady and unflinching. "You don't have to fear me, Maggie." Her name on his lips startled her, soft, reverent, like a prayer. "I'm not afraid," she whispered, though the tremor in her voice betrayed her. She turned, fussing with the lantern wick as though it needed her attention. But when she glanced back, she found Elias still watching her, not with the hunger of a boy, but with the longing of a man who had found something rare. The silence thickened, carrying the weight of words neither dared speak. And in that barn, under the lantern's glow, Maggie realized the most dangerous thing wasn't his presence. It was the way her heart answered to it. Sunday bells rang through San Luis Obispo, calling folks to church. Maggie walked in alone, her black shawl pulled tight, head bowed against the whispers that always followed her. But this morning was different. Elias trailed in after, dusty hat in his hands, sitting just a few pews back. His presence rolled through the congregation like thunder. Eyes turned, mouths curled. The whispers began. Widow Holloway bringing a boy around. Shameless, isn't she? What could he want but her land? Each word cut deeper than the last, their venom filling the sacred hall. Maggie's spine stiffened, her face frozen, though inside her chest a storm raged. Elias heard it all. His fists clenched against the pew, jaw tight enough to crack. When a rancher in the back snorted loud, "Poor widow's got herself a calf for company." Elias shot up, turning, ready to strike. The church gasped. Maggie reached him first. Her hand closed around his arm, her touch trembling but firm. "Sit," she whispered, her voice steel wrapped in fear. "Don't give them the fight they want." For a moment, rage burned in Elias's eyes, fierce and unyielding. Then he sat, but the shame of stillness cut him as deep as the insults had. Maggie stared forward, lips moving in prayer, though her words were less for heaven than for the strength to endure. When the service ended, the townsfolk filed out with their sideways glances and poisoned smiles. Elias lingered near the door, his shoulders squared. Maggie passed him without a word, her shawl shielding her from their judgment. But she knew the cost of this boy's loyalty was rising, and her heart feared she couldn't pay it. The skies broke without warning. Dark clouds gathered over the Holloway vineyard, and by dusk, the heavens split wide, spilling rain like the fury of God himself. Maggie rushed into the rows, skirts heavy with mud, shouting at the workers who had long since gone. There was no one left but Elias. He was already there, sleeves rolled, tying vines against the whipping wind. The rain lashed at his face, soaking him through, but his arms worked with a rhythm that seemed born of survival itself. Maggie gripped the posts, her hands raw as she tried to steady the trellises. "Get inside!" she cried, her voice lost in the storm. Elias only shook his head, teeth flashing in the lightning. "If we don't hold them now, you'll lose the whole vineyard." His voice was thunder, his will unmovable. Together they fought the storm, hauling branches upright, driving stakes into the mud. Maggie slipped, her knees striking the earth, but Elias caught her before she fell too far. For a moment she was in his arms, breathless, rain streaming down her face. She should have pulled away. She didn't. The storm raged, but in the crackle of lightning and the pounding rain, Maggie saw him as more than a boy. A man forged by hardship, unyielding and steadfast. His grip on her arm was strong, grounding her in a world that had long spun out of her control. By midnight the rain eased. The vineyard stood battered but alive. Elias leaned against a post, chest heaving, drenched but smiling through exhaustion. Maggie's breath caught. He looked like salvation, and that terrified her more than any storm. The storm left the vineyard dripping and broken, moonlight catching on every trembling leaf. Inside the barn, lantern light flickered against damp wood. Maggie wrung the rain from her shawl, her hands shaking not from cold, but from the weight of what had nearly been lost. Elias stood a few feet away, chest bare where his shirt clung to him, steam rising from his skin. "You should have gone home," she muttered, refusing to meet his gaze. "No vineyard is worth a man's life." Elias stepped closer, voice steady but sharp. "It ain't just the vineyard. It's you." Her breath caught. She turned sharply, anger her shield. "Don't you dare say that! You don't know what you're talking about!" But he didn't flinch. His eyes burned, his voice low and aching. "I've worked my hands raw for you. I've listened to the town spit poison, and I've stayed because something in me won't let me walk away. You think I don't see it? The way you're lonely, same as me." Tears welled in her eyes, unbidden, unwelcome. She pressed a hand to her mouth, shaking her head. "Elias, I'm too old. I've buried a husband. I've carried a house of whispers on my back for years. If I let myself feel anything for you, they'll destroy me. They'll destroy us both." He closed the space between them, close enough for her to feel the heat of him. His voice softened. "Then let 'em. Let the town talk. I don't want their blessing, I just want you." Maggie's heart hammered, torn between the fear of judgment and the truth pressing at her lips. In the silence, the barn seemed to breathe with them, waiting for her answer. And for the first time in years, she let her tears fall freely, knowing her walls had begun to crumble. The barn smelled of rain and damp earth, lantern light flickering over rough beams. Maggie stood trembling, her tears fresh on her cheeks. Elias didn't move, didn't breathe, as if one wrong step would shatter what fragile thread bound them in that moment. "You should go," she whispered, though her voice betrayed her. "Before I do something foolish." Elias's eyes softened, but his jaw held firm. "Maybe it's only foolish if we let them call it so." Silence wrapped around them, heavy and waiting. Maggie's heart thrashed, every instinct screaming to run. Yet her feet remained rooted. Elias lifted a hand slowly, like a man gentling a wild horse. He brushed a damp strand of hair from her face, his touch feather light. She closed her eyes, breath trembling, and for the first time in years allowed herself to lean into someone's hand. Her lips parted, ready to protest, but instead, a sob slipped free. And then it happened. Elias bent low, capturing her mouth with his. The kiss was hesitant at first, soft as rain dripping from leaves, then grew fierce with all the longing both had buried too long. Maggie clutched his shirt, half pulling him closer, half pushing him away, but his warmth swallowed her resistance. When at last she pulled back, her chest heaved, eyes wide with fear and wonder. "This isn't right," she murmured, though her voice sounded nothing like conviction. Elias leaned his forehead to hers, whispering, "Then let it be wrong. I've never wanted anything truer." The world outside rumbled quiet with fading thunder, but inside the barn, the storm between them had only just begun. The barn had grown quiet, the storm outside fading to a hush. Maggie stood trembling in Elias's arms, her lips still tingling from the kiss. She should have pushed him away, told him to leave, but instead her fingers clung to his shirt as though letting go would tear her in half. "Elias," she whispered, her voice raw with fear and want. "I've spent years convincing myself my heart was buried with him, that I was too old, too broken." He cupped her face, his thumb brushing away a tear. "You're not broken, Maggie. You're the strongest soul I've ever known, and you ain't old to me. You're just you, the only one I see." Something inside her cracked open, something she had locked away since her husband's death. She searched Elias's face, not for youth or rebellion, but for truth, and she found it, burning steady in his eyes. No boy's hunger, no fleeting desire, a man's devotion. Their mouths found each other again, this time with no hesitation. The kiss deepened, pulling years of loneliness into one fire-lit moment. Maggie's hands tangled in his hair, his palms pressed against the curve of her back, pulling her against him. Their breath came ragged, their hearts frantic, as if they feared the world would tear them apart come morning. On the barn's hay-strewn floor, beneath the whisper of rain on the roof, they gave in. Every touch was tender, every gasp a promise unspoken. Maggie rediscovered the ache of being wanted, Elias found the peace of finally belonging. They did not rush. They lingered, memorizing each other, holding fast as though time itself could not claim them. When it was done, she lay against his chest, tears mixing with the warmth of his skin. For the first time in years, Maggie Holloway felt alive. Dawn crept into the barn, soft and unforgiving. Golden light slipped through the cracks in the boards, settling across Maggie's face as she stirred against Elias's chest. For a moment she allowed herself the luxury of stillness, the rise and fall of his breath, the warmth of his arm around her waist. But then the world rushed back, sharp and merciless. She pulled away, sitting upright, clutching her shawl around her shoulders as though it could shield her from the truth of the night. "What have we done?" she whispered, her voice trembling. Elias sat up, eyes heavy with sleep but steady. "We've done what our hearts wanted. Nothing more, nothing less." Her hands shook as she tied the shawl. "You don't understand. The town will crucify me, a widow lying with a boy. They'll strip me of what little respect I have left." Her throat caught. "And they'll ruin you, Elias. You'll be branded no better than a vulture." He leaned forward, catching her gaze with quiet intensity. "Let 'em talk. Their words won't fill your bed at night, nor mend the ache in your chest. I ain't here for their blessing, Maggie. I'm here for you." Tears burned her eyes. His conviction was a balm and a wound all at once. She wanted to believe him, but the years of grief and judgment pressed heavy. She turned away, hugging herself. Elias reached for her hand. She almost pulled back, almost. But instead her fingers curled into his. "I don't know if I'm strong enough," she confessed. "You don't have to be," he said softly. "I'll be strong for the both of us." Maggie closed her eyes, torn between fear and the faint, dangerous hope that maybe, just maybe, love could outlast shame. The Harvest Festival lit the town square with lanterns and fiddle tunes, laughter spilling into the night air. Stalls brimmed with pies and cider, children darted between wagons, and every pair of eyes watched for one thing more entertaining than the games: Widow Holloway. Maggie stood at the edge of the crowd, her shawl pulled close, heart hammering like a trapped bird. Beside her, Elias adjusted his hat, calm as if he didn't feel the weight of 100 whispers pressing down. "You don't have to do this," she murmured, voice tight with fear. He looked at her, eyes steady as the hills. "Yes, I do. And so do you." The fiddler struck a lively tune, couples swirling in the dust. Elias reached out his hand. Maggie's breath caught. If she took it, the town would never forgive her. If she refused, she would never forgive herself. Slowly, trembling, she placed her hand in his. Gasps rippled through the square. A few women turned away in scorn. Men muttered behind their mugs. But Elias only tightened his grip and led her into the lantern light. They danced. Awkward at first, her steps faltering, his touch gentle but sure. Then, as the music swelled, something shifted. The years fell from her shoulders, the whispers faded, and she laughed, truly laughed, for the first time since the war stole her husband.